It was a gray afternoon when I first saw her. The kind of day where the clouds are thick enough to blot out the sun but still leave the air crisp and cool, the kind of day that makes you wonder if the world is holding its breath. I had just finished a meeting in the city and found myself wandering the streets aimlessly, looking for something to occupy the emptiness that had settled inside me. That's when I walked past the small cafe, tucked in between two high-rise buildings, almost hidden from the bustling world around it. I hadn't meant to go in. In fact, I had planned on heading straight to the office, but something drew me to that spot, something in the air, maybe, or perhaps it was just a moment of weakness, a desire to escape the weight of the world I had inherited. I pushed the door open, the chime of the bell above it echoing softly in the quiet space. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around me like a blanket, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment I had been immersed in all day. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air. But it wasn't the smell that caught my attention. It was her. She was sitting by the window, her back to me, but her presence was unmistakable. I don't know what it was, maybe the way the sunlight caught the strands of her dark hair or how she seemed to exist in her own little universe, completely unaffected by the world outside. I paused at the door, unsure of whether I should approach her or just walk away. I decided to walk toward the counter, pretending I hadn't noticed her. I ordered my usual, black coffee, and sat at a table near the window, facing away from her. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know who she was. There was something magnetic about her, something I couldn't explain, yet it tugged at me like a force I had never encountered before. I tried to focus on the newspaper in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to her. It was then, as if on cue, she turned her head, and for the first time, our eyes met. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, perhaps indifference, or a brief glance, something fleeting. But there was nothing brief about her gaze. Her eyes locked onto mine with such intensity that I felt as if the world around us disappeared. The noise of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the chatter of strangers, it all faded away. For a moment, neither of us moved. It was as if time itself had paused, giving us a brief moment of silence to recognize each other. There was something in her eyes, something raw, untamed, and free, that made me feel as though I had just stumbled upon a secret I wasn't meant to know. I felt an inexplicable urge to speak, to say something, anything. But I couldn't find the words. So, I did what I always did, what I had been taught to do. I looked away, breaking the connection, but not before I saw the faintest flicker of a smile tug at the corner of her lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And in that moment, I felt something stir deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I didn't stay long that day. I finished my coffee, paid my tab, and left without looking back. But as I walked out of the cafe and back into the city streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something had shifted within me. Who was she? What was it about her that had left such an impact? I couldn't explain it. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't stop thinking about her. And that, for someone like me, was dangerous. I had always lived a life dictated by expectations, those of my family, my upbringing, my station in life. I had never given much thought to anything outside of what was expected of me. But in that brief encounter, something had stirred inside me, something I couldn't suppress. It was the feeling of wanting more, of seeking something beyond the carefully curated life I had been living. But could I afford to pursue this? Could I afford to risk everything, my family's legacy, my future, on someone I barely knew? I didn't have the answers. But as I walked away from that cafe, I knew one thing for certain, would be back. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't get her out of my mind. Isla Montague. The name rang through my thoughts, her face haunting every waking moment. There was something about her, something raw and unfiltered, that both terrified and exhilarated me. I tried to focus on work, on the demands of my family, but it was as if my entire world had shifted without me even realizing it. I had always been the dutiful son, the one who followed the rules and met every expectation placed upon me. My parents had built their lives around an image of success, an image that I was expected to uphold. My education at the finest institutions, my position at Kingsley Enterprises, all of it was part of the blueprint. And I had never questioned it. Not until now. Isla was different. She was a reminder of everything I had been taught to avoid: freedom, unpredictability, passion. She didn't belong to the world I had grown up in. She was from a different world entirely, one where choices weren't preordained by family legacies and societal status. That thought alone sent a chill down my spine. How could I, Elias Kingsley, the heir to a legacy that stretched back generations, possibly have a place in her world? I tried to push the thought aside, but the pull was too strong. So, I returned to that cafe. I didn't know why. Maybe I was looking for something: closure, a sense of purpose, or perhaps, I was simply trying to understand why she had captivated me so completely. The moment I walked through the door again, I felt it, the same magnetic pull. She was there, sitting by the window once more, her head buried in a book, seemingly unaware of the world around her. I hesitated, my heart racing. This time, I wasn't sure if I was brave enough to approach her. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to leave before I made any further mistakes. But my feet moved on their own, guiding me toward her table. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I hadn't planned on saying anything, yet the words seemed to slip out effortlessly. Maybe I had wanted this, wanted to know her, more than I had realized. Isla looked up from her book, her dark eyes meeting mine. There was no shock in her gaze. No hesitation. She smiled, a faint but knowing curve of her lips that seemed to suggest she had been expecting me. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. I sat down, unsure of what to say next. The silence between us was thick, charged with an energy that neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. I glanced at her book, something about poetry, but I couldn't focus on the words. My attention was entirely on her, on the way she looked at me with an expression that was neither judgmental nor intrigued, but simply open. "Elias Kingsley," I introduced myself, suddenly feeling foolish for using my full name as though it meant something here. I was in the neighborhood, and I thought I'd stop by again. "Isla Montague," she replied, her voice soft, but it carried a strength I couldn't quite explain. "I thought I'd seen you before. You don't strike me as the cafe type." Her words stung a little, but I couldn't deny their truth. I was out of place here, in this little corner of the world where people didn't know or care about the Kingsley name. I had spent my entire life adhering to expectations, playing the role I had been given, and now I felt like a stranger in my own skin. "I don't usually come to places like this," I admitted, meeting her gaze again. "But I suppose we all need to break the routine every once in a while." Her lips quirked upward again, as though she found something amusing in my confession. "What brought you here, then?" I paused, unsure how much of myself I was willing to reveal. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. I was supposed to be in control, always in control. Yet, with her, I felt something shift, something that made me want to be honest, even if it made no sense. "I guess I was looking for something," I said, surprised by my own vulnerability. "Something different, something I can't explain." Isla studied me for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. It felt as though she was peeling back the layers of my facade, seeing right through me. I wasn't used to being seen like this, not by someone who wasn't already a part of my world. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "I think everyone's looking for something," she said softly. "The question is whether they'll ever find it." The weight of her words lingered between us, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of doubt about everything I had been taught to believe. Could I really keep living this life, this scripted existence, without ever chasing what I truly wanted? Could I afford to walk away from the cage of expectations my family had built for me? I had been so focused on fulfilling my duty, so intent on meeting the demands of those who had come before me, that I hadn't even considered the possibility of living for myself. But now, sitting across from Isla, I couldn't help but wonder, what if I didn't have to choose between the life I knew and the life I could have? Before I could respond, the quiet hum of the cafe was interrupted by a sudden noise. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen and saw my mother's name. I sighed, a sense of dread creeping over me. "I'm sorry," I muttered, excusing myself from the table. "I have to take this." I stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to go back to the life that awaited me, but I knew I had to. As I walked back to my car, the weight of my mother's voice on the other end of the line felt like a chain around my neck. "Elias," she said, her tone clipped. "There's something we need to discuss. Your future." It was always the same. My future, my legacy, my responsibilities. I had never been allowed to just exist, to simply be. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that I was suffocating, that I had trapped myself in a world that wasn't mine. But for the briefest of moments, I had felt something else. A possibility. A glimpse of a life where I wasn't bound by anyone's expectations but my own. Isla Montague had shown me that. As the days passed, the tension between my duty and my desires grew more palpable. Every time I thought about Isla, I wondered what would happen if I pursued that pull, if I allowed myself to see where it might lead. But I couldn't ignore the fact that the life I had been born into wasn't just about me. It was about family, tradition, reputation. And in that world, there was no room for distractions. Yet, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Isla, with her quiet strength and her defiance, had cracked open something in me that I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. I had to see her again. The days that followed our meeting felt like an endless cycle of thoughts and distractions. Every task I performed, every conversation I had, felt hollow in comparison to the time I had spent with Isla. She had somehow managed to slip past my defenses, leaving a mark that I couldn't erase. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been so consumed by another person. I hadn't even wanted it, at least not consciously, but there I was, at the mercy of my own emotions. I tried to focus on work, on my responsibilities at Kingsley Enterprises, but it was impossible to ignore the constant tug in my chest, the longing to return to that small cafe. I couldn't let go of the image of her sitting by the window, her eyes scanning her book, the quiet strength in the way she carried herself. There was a freedom in her that I couldn't ignore, a reminder that I had been living in a cage of my own making. I hadn't seen her since that day, and a part of me feared that it was a one-time encounter, that she would slip away like so many fleeting moments in my life. But something kept drawing me back, something told me that our meeting had meant more than just a casual interaction. So, I returned to the cafe. As I stepped inside, I immediately spotted her. She was sitting at the same table, her gaze directed out the window as the soft rain tapped against the glass. For a moment, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this again, for whatever emotions this encounter might stir. But before I could think twice, she turned and met my eyes. There was no hesitation in her gaze, no shock, just a quiet acknowledgement. "Back again?" she asked, a teasing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I couldn't help but smile back, the tension in my shoulders easing. "I suppose I'm a creature of habit. Or maybe you're just looking for an excuse to come see me," she teased, raising an eyebrow. The casualness of her tone disarmed me, and for a moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, ease. There were no expectations, no obligations, just two people meeting in a place that seemed completely outside the realm of my world. "I could be," I said, my voice lower than I intended, and for the first time, I allowed myself to lean into the moment. She motioned for me to sit, and I did, not bothering with the usual formalities or pleasantries. I was here because I wanted to be, not because I had to be. But the reality of my life quickly began to sink in as soon as I took my seat. I was still Elias Kingsley, the heir to a family fortune, bound by the expectations of my name. But for now, I pushed those thoughts aside. There was something more pressing at hand, something I had been avoiding. "I've been thinking," I began, the words spilling out before I could stop them, "about what you said the other day. About everyone looking for something." I paused, meeting her gaze. "What do you think people are really looking for? And do you think they ever find it?" Isla studied me for a long moment, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her cup. "I think people are looking for meaning," she said slowly, her voice quiet but firm. "They're looking for something that makes sense of their lives, something that gives them purpose. But sometimes they never find it. They get too caught up in the doing and forget to live." Her words struck me harder than I anticipated. It was as though she had seen through the facade I had so carefully constructed, had understood the quiet emptiness I had been trying to ignore. I had spent my whole life in pursuit of success, money, power, influence, yet I had never stopped to ask myself why. What was the point of all of it if it didn't bring me happiness? "You make it sound so simple," I said, a trace of bitterness creeping into my voice. "It's not simple," she replied, her eyes softening. "It's messy, and it's hard. But it's also real." I looked down at my hands, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. Everything in my life had been planned, controlled, orchestrated. Every move I made had been for the future, for an image, for a name. But I had never stopped to wonder what I wanted. Isla was right. The life I had built had become a cage, and I had become its prisoner. "So, what do you want, Elias?" Her question cut through the silence, the simplicity of it stunning me into stillness. "What is it that you're really searching for?" I met her gaze, feeling my pulse quicken. In that moment, I knew I had to be honest, not just with her, but with myself. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm looking for. But I think I need to find it." Her smile softened, and she leaned forward, her eyes never leaving mine. "Maybe you already have." The rest of our conversation was easy, effortless, like we had known each other for years, not just days. It felt natural, as though all the barriers between us had disappeared. We spoke about everything and nothing, books, music, the trivialities of life that had never seemed important until that moment. But as I left the cafe, a sense of dread slowly began to creep in. Isla was right. I had been searching for something, someone, without even realizing it. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had opened a door I wasn't ready to walk through. The questions that had plagued me for so long were now out in the open, and I couldn't simply ignore them anymore. What did I want? What was I willing to risk for a life I wasn't even sure was possible? I wasn't sure. But as I walked away, Isla's words echoed in my mind, "Maybe you already have." In the quiet that followed, I found myself at a crossroads. My world, so neatly ordered, so carefully constructed, was now crumbling under the weight of my own desires. Isla had shown me a glimpse of something more, something real. But the reality of it was far from simple. I had everything to lose, and yet, a part of me was beginning to wonder if it was worth it. As I sat in my car, I stared at the phone in my hand. I had received a message from my mother earlier, and I knew it was about the plans for my future, plans that didn't include me choosing my own path. I had a decision to make. The days were blurring together, a cocktail of emotions I couldn't control, mixed with obligations that refused to let me go. Every time I tried to step outside the boundaries of my carefully constructed life, I was pulled back by the same invisible strings. I couldn't deny it any longer, something inside me had changed. I couldn't stop thinking about Isla. She was in my mind every hour of the day, a constant presence that I both welcomed and feared. Every conversation, every glance we shared left me with an aching desire for something I couldn't quite define. It was as though I was walking through life with a veil over my eyes, and now, for the first time, I could see clearly. But seeing clearly meant facing the truth. Isla and I were from two entirely different worlds. She was free, untethered, unbound by the rules that had dictated my existence. And no matter how much I longed to be a part of that world, I knew I couldn't. My family, my entire legacy, was built on a foundation of control. I had responsibilities I couldn't ignore, choices that had already been made for me. The problem was, I wasn't sure if I even wanted those responsibilities anymore. I had been to enough meetings, signed enough papers, and played enough roles to know what my life was supposed to be. But now, standing at the precipice of a future that had already been set out for me, I was beginning to question whether it was the right path. I didn't know how to ask for what I wanted. I hadn't spoken to my parents about Isla, of course. The idea that I, Elias Kingsley, heir to the Kingsley fortune, could want something outside of what was already planned for me was laughable. They would never understand. But that didn't stop the feeling from growing inside me. It was a silent rebellion, a whisper in the back of my mind that wouldn't be quieted. And then, the phone call came. It was my mother. I had been dreading it, and yet, when I saw her name on the screen, I knew it was inevitable. Elias, she said, her voice as smooth and controlled as ever. I think it's time we have a serious conversation about your future. I sighed, the weight of her words settling in my chest. I know, Mother. We've discussed it before. No, not like this, she replied, her tone firm. We've received an offer. A proposal for a merger. This is a pivotal moment for Kingsley Enterprises, and we expect you to step into your role more fully. It's time to start planning for your future, our family's future. Your father and I have been working on this for months. I felt a surge of frustration rising in my chest. Another merger, another deal. Another thread in the web I had been caught in my entire life. I understand, I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the emotion that bubbled beneath the surface. I'll be there. The conversation ended, but the knot in my stomach remained. I was being pulled deeper into this world, into this life, one that had never asked me what I wanted. Every expectation, every move was dictated by others. It was never about me. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus, but every task felt like a weight I couldn't lift. The phone call with my mother lingered, echoing in my mind. Was I really ready to accept this future? Was I ready to put everything, my hopes, my desires, my chance, at something real, aside for the family name? The next day, I found myself once again standing in front of the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been here so many times now, always for the same reason, Isla. I couldn't get her out of my mind. But more than that, I couldn't ignore the way she made me feel, like I was someone different, someone more. When I walked inside, I saw her immediately, sitting by the same window, a soft smile playing on her lips as she looked up at me. I felt the weight in my chest lighten for the briefest of moments, as though I had come home. Back again? She asked, a playful twinkle in her eye. I nodded, taking the seat across from her without hesitation. I couldn't stay away. She chuckled softly, her eyes dancing with something I couldn't quite read. I guess I'm starting to believe you're a creature of habit after all. The lightness of her words made the pressure in my chest ease, but only for a moment. The truth of my situation was never far from my mind. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I don't know if I can keep living like this. It's all been decided for me, and I'm not sure I want it anymore. Isla raised an eyebrow, leaning forward, her expression serious now. What are you talking about? I hesitated, feeling the weight of everything I was about to say. I wasn't used to being vulnerable, especially not with someone like her. But there was something in her eyes, something in the way she looked at me, that made me feel safe, made me feel like I could say these things out loud. My parents, my family, I began slowly. They have a plan for me. A future that's already been decided. I'm supposed to take over Kingsley Enterprises, merge with other companies, build the family legacy. But it's not my legacy. It's theirs. I don't know if I want it anymore. I don't know if I can keep living this life, pretending that it's enough. Isla was quiet for a long moment, her gaze never leaving mine. I felt exposed, as though I had laid everything bare for her to see. But her silence wasn't judgmental. It was understanding. Maybe you don't have to, she said softly, her voice calm but firm. Maybe you don't have to live the life they want for you. Maybe you can find your own way. I swallowed hard, the words stirring something deep inside me. What if I can't? What if I can't break free from all of this? She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. You can. You just have to want it badly enough. I didn't know if I was ready to make that choice. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. I walked away from the cafe that day with a strange sense of clarity. Isla's words echoed in my mind, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a prisoner. There was still fear, of course, the weight of my family's expectations, the legacy of the Kingsley name, but I knew something had shifted inside me. Isla had shown me a new possibility, one that I hadn't even dared to consider before. The choice was mine. I could continue down the path that had been laid before me, or I could step into the unknown, and carve out a future of my own. But there was something else now, something I hadn't expected. I wanted to be with Isla. And if I had to choose between the life I knew and the one I could build with her, I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay in my old world. I woke up that morning with the feeling that something had shifted. The air around me seemed heavier, the quiet more suffocating, as though the world was holding its breath. The decisions I had been avoiding, pushing away, pretending not to notice, were no longer something I could escape. For weeks, I had been pretending to move through life as though nothing had changed. I would attend meetings, smile at the right moments, nod when necessary. But my thoughts were always elsewhere, on Isla, on that fleeting taste of freedom she had shown me. She had broken through the walls I had so carefully built around myself, and now the cracks were starting to show. I had no idea how much longer I could keep pretending. The merger proposal my mother had mentioned was moving forward, fast-tracked, and the board was already starting to push me into the role they had planned for me. My father had started talking about the company's future like it was already written in stone, like I had no choice in the matter. The weight of it all was crushing. I had told myself that I could go through with it, that I could live the life they wanted me to live. After all, I had no other choice. But every time I thought about Isla, about the way she made me feel, it was like a burning question I couldn't ignore: is this all there is? That afternoon, I found myself standing in the lobby of Kingsley Enterprises, the glass doors towering in front of me like some monumental obstacle. Inside, my future awaited. I had a meeting scheduled with my father and the board, a discussion that would determine the course of my life. There would be no turning back after today. But as I stood there, waiting for the elevator to take me up, I couldn't shake the thought of Isla. I wanted to see her, to talk to her, to feel something real. And for the first time in a long while, I realized that I wasn't sure I could do this anymore. I wasn't sure I could be Elias Kingsley, the dutiful son, the heir to the empire. I'm not ready to give this up, I thought, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. But the very next moment, another thought rose to the surface: what if I'm not ready to let Isla go, either? I was standing at a precipice, and the ground beneath me felt like it was crumbling. The elevator dinged, and I stepped inside, pushing the button for the top floor. The slow ascent felt agonizing, as though every floor was another moment of my life slipping away. When the doors finally opened, I was greeted by the polished, sterile atmosphere of my father's office, the place where all my decisions had been made for me. My father was sitting at the massive desk, his usual air of control unwavering. The board members were already seated around the room, their faces a mixture of expectation and impatience. "Elias," my father said as I entered, his tone sharp, his eyes cool. "We've been waiting for you." I nodded stiffly, taking my seat at the head of the table, though the position felt more like a trap than a place of power. "We've reviewed the merger proposal," my father continued. "It's a good deal. It's the future of Kingsley Enterprises. It's time for you to take your place as the next leader of this company." I felt the weight of every word, each one sinking deeper into my chest. "I understand," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. The words felt like sand in my mouth. But the truth was, I didn't understand. I didn't know if this was what I wanted. I didn't know if I could spend my life buried in spreadsheets and conference calls, making decisions that affected thousands of lives but meant nothing to me. "I think we need to take a step back," I said, surprising myself with the suddenness of the words. My voice was steadier than I expected, though my heart pounded in my chest. "Before we proceed, I need some time to think. I need to reconsider everything." My father's expression didn't change, but I could feel the tension in the room shift. "Elias," he said, his voice low, "this is not a decision you can just put off. This isn't something you can think about forever. Your responsibility to this company is not negotiable." "I know," I said, standing up. "But right now, I need to figure out if this is the life I want. If this is the life I'm meant to live." I turned to leave, my heart racing. "You can't walk away from this, Elias," my father called after me. "This is your legacy." But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I didn't go back to the office. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the streets, not knowing where I was going, but unable to ignore the pull that led me back to the one place that had become my refuge, the cafe where I had first met Isla. As I entered, I immediately spotted her. She was sitting by the window again, the same peaceful expression on her face as she read her book. She didn't notice me at first, so I stood there for a moment, watching her. In that moment, I realized just how much I had been denying. I had spent so long trying to live up to expectations, my family's, the company's, society's, that I had forgotten how to just live. I had forgotten what it meant to be human, to be myself. And now, as I stood here, watching Isla, I knew that if I didn't make a change, I would lose everything that truly mattered. She looked up, catching my gaze, and a soft smile spread across her face. Without a word, she gestured for me to sit. I walked over and took a seat, my mind still racing, but for the first time, there was clarity. "I don't know what I'm doing," I said before I even sat down, the words tumbling out. "I don't know what's happening to me, Isla. I've spent my whole life doing what was expected of me, and now I'm not sure if I can keep going." She set her book down, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to," she said gently. "You don't have to keep doing what everyone else wants you to do. It's your life, Elias. You can choose." I looked at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "But what if I choose wrong? What if I walk away from everything I've worked for?" She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "Choosing isn't about being right or wrong. It's about being true to yourself. And that's the only thing that matters." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I could walk away from everything and create something new. But the reality of my situation was looming over me, a constant reminder of what I stood to lose. "Then help me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Help me figure out who I am. Because I don't know anymore." As I sat there, the weight of my past and future pressing down on me, I realized that I was at the crossroads of my life. Isla had given me the courage to confront my fears, to question everything I had been told about who I was supposed to be. But now, the choice was mine to make. I could either stay in the life I knew, or I could leave it all behind and step into the unknown. But stepping into the unknown meant more than just leaving behind my family's empire. It meant risking everything. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. The days after that conversation with Isla were a blur, a whirlwind of decisions I wasn't ready to make. I spent hours walking through the city, lost in thought, questioning every step I'd ever taken. The life I had lived, the life I was supposed to live, felt distant, like a shadow I couldn't quite grasp. And yet, there was something as she had shown me a different world, one where I wasn't confined by the weight of my family's legacy. She had opened my eyes to a life that could be free, a life that could be mine. But now, it was time to decide when the phone rang on the third morning after I'd left that meeting at Kingsley Enterprises. It was Elias, his voice was tight, as though he already knew what was coming. I didn't say anything. My mind raced. I knew what was coming, too. The pressure, the expectations, the talk of duty. I couldn't avoid it. I'm not coming back, Father, I said, my voice shaking slightly, but there was silence on the other end of the line, long enough that You're making a mistake, Elias. You're throwing away everything we've worked for. Do you really think this girl is worth it? Is this some kind of rebellion against your future? You'll regret it. I heard the disappointment in his words, but it wasn't enough to turn me around. I'm not throwing anything away, I said, my voice steadier now. I'm choosing something different. Something real. I gave you everything, Elias, he said, his voice quiet, almost pleading now. I built this legacy for you to carry. And you'll just walk away? Just like that? My chest tightened. The legacy, the word haunted me. It had always been about the Kingsley name, the empire. And I had spent my entire life trying to live up to it. But for once, I didn't care. I'm sorry, I said, closing my eyes, trying to steady my breath. I can't live your dream anymore. And with that, I hung up. The weight of it lingered, but there was a strange sense of relief, too. I had made my choice. The decision had been made, and I was free to choose my own path, even if it meant walking away from everything I had ever known. The next day, I met Isla. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to see her, to feel that connection we shared, the one that had been my anchor through the storm of my own indecision. I found her at the cafe, just as I had so many times before. She looked up when she saw me enter, and I saw her smile, but there was something different in her eyes today. A flicker of something, fear. Concern. Elias, you look different, she said, standing to greet me. Is everything okay? I nodded, but it didn't feel like enough. The weight of what I was about to tell her was heavy on my chest, but I knew it was necessary. I've made a decision, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. I've walked away from everything. The company. The legacy. My family. All of it. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes wide, processing the words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, genuine, radiant. I had never seen her look more beautiful than in that moment. But just as I thought everything was falling into place, her expression shifted. It was subtle, but I saw it, the hesitation. She stepped back, and the smile faded. Elias, she began, her voice soft, I don't want to hold you back. I felt my heart stop in my chest. What do you mean? Isla, no, listen, she cut me off gently, her hand resting on the table. This is what I've been afraid of. I've watched you struggle, I've seen how much you've given up for your family, but, you can't just walk away from everything. You don't even know what that life means. It's not just about the freedom you think you're going to find. It's about sacrifice. And I don't want you to sacrifice everything for me. Isla, I said, reaching out to take her hand. I've already made the sacrifice. I've given up everything that never mattered. You matter to me. More than anything else. I want a life with you. She withdrew her hand slowly, and the distance between us felt like a chasm. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. You can't have both. You can't walk away from the legacy and think everything will just work out. I'm not the answer, Elias. You have so much more ahead of you, things you can't even imagine. I'm just a chapter in your life. A beautiful one, yes, but just a chapter. My world seemed to collapse in on itself. The pain in my chest was sharp, piercing. Isla, don't say that. Please, I care about you, Elias, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But you deserve someone who can give you everything. And I can't do that. I'm not that person. Her words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe as my mind raced. How could she say this? After everything we had? I love you, I said, but the words felt empty now, useless in the face of her withdrawal. I know you do, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. But you have to let me go. The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words fell between us, but they never seemed to reach either of us. In the end, I left the cafe alone, the silence of the city pressing down on me like a weight. My world had shattered, and there was no one left to catch the pieces. As I walked away from her, the truth hit me. Like a wave. I had made a choice, but it was a choice that had cost me everything. I had walked away from my family, from my legacy, but in doing so, I had lost Isla, the one person I had wanted to hold on to. I had thought that love could be enough. But love, it seemed, was never enough when faced with the complexities of life. And as I stood there, staring at the empty street before me, I realized the one thing I had never understood: freedom, real freedom, didn't come without a price. And the price I had paid was more than I could bear. 2 months later, I received a letter. It was from Isla. I had thought I'd lost her for good. But the words she wrote were not an end, but a beginning. Elias, I have thought about you every day since we parted. You were right about one thing: I love you. I always have. But I also know that there are things I must do on my own. I need time. But that doesn't mean we're finished. I believe in us, and I believe that someday we'll find our way back to each other. Just not yet. Please wait for me. I didn't know if I could wait. But as I held her letter, I knew one thing for certain: the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The road ahead would be long, and the distance between us would test both our love and our will. But as I looked out at the horizon, I knew one thing: I had made the right choice. Because sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the truest paths.